Welcome to Animal Attacks. Today I'm covering a snake researcher who believed the experience alone could control something built to overpower it. From a fisherman who skipped the gloves and kept working like it was just another day, to a print shop job funding a YouTube channel, live streaming inside an abandoned hospital where something was still hiding in the dark, let's start with a researcher who sent the guide away, the only person who truly understood the risk. It was March 14th, 2018, deep within a remote river tributary in interior Kalimantan, Borneo. A veteran snake researcher attempted to prove a belief that had guided his entire career. Dr. Eszter Jeffries was 54 years old and had spent almost 30 years studying giant constrictors all across Southeast Asia. For most of that time, he worked through a university research program, but after the funding was cut, he didn't stop. He just kept going on his own, taking conservation grants, consulting for wildlife documentaries, and doing whatever he could to stay in the field. 30 years. That's not a hobby, that's a life built around one thing. Over the years, Jeffries became known for one particular belief. He genuinely thought large pythons were misunderstood. In his mind, if someone had enough experience, they could safely handle even the biggest snakes without getting hurt. So, in early 2018, he traveled into the interior of Kalimantan with his 26-year-old research assistant, Yael Sondak, and a local guide named Pario. They were filming reticulated pythons for a documentary Jeffries was paying for himself. After spending several days searching through the forest, they finally found what they had come for: a reticulated python that looked to be close to 20 feet long, resting beside a fallen log near the river. Pario warned him more than once. Around there, local residents didn't approach snakes that size by themselves, especially during the active season. But Jeffries had spent decades working with giant snakes, and he never really believed this one would be any different. The following day, he sent Pario back to camp while Yael operated a drone from higher ground. I want to sit with that. He sent the guide away, the only person who really understood what the snake could do. After setting up his cameras, Jeffries approached the snake by himself, lifted the front third of its body over his shoulder, while the rest remained stretched across the ground, and remarked that its grip felt lighter than most people imagined as the first loose coil settled around his torso. The sudden force pulled Jeffries forward, and another coil quickly locked around his lower chest. He immediately attempted to pry the snake away, but the animal's immense strength eliminated any useful leverage. As he struggled, the python instinctively adjusted its coils, maintaining relentless pressure around his chest and torso. One of his arms became partially pinned against his body, leaving him with fewer options to free himself. His breathing quickly became strained. The python maintained constant pressure around his chest, making each breath progressively shallower until he could no longer expand his lungs normally. Hoping to break the animal's grip, he stumbled backward toward the fallen log, but the movement only caused the coils to shift and maintain their crushing hold. Watching through the drone's live feed, Yael initially believed Jeffries had intentionally lowered himself to demonstrate the snake's behavior. Only after the researcher stopped moving did he realize something was seriously wrong. He sprinted through the forest toward the riverbank and found Jeffries still trapped beneath the python's coils. I keep thinking about that. From the drone, it just looked like field work. Knowing he could not safely remove a snake that size alone, Yael called for Pario. Working from the tail forward, they used a sturdy forked branch and a metal pry bar to peel apart the coils one at a time. After several exhausting minutes, the python finally released its grip and retreated. By then, Jeffries showed no signs of life. The post-mortem examination determined that Jeffries died from mechanical asphyxia caused by sustained thoracic compression with circulatory compromise contributing to the fatal outcome. Several ribs had fractured under prolonged pressure, with minor associated soft tissue hemorrhage, but no major organ rupture or catastrophic vascular injury. Investigators concluded that the fatal outcome resulted from prolonged thoracic compression, causing mechanical asphyxia and circulatory compromise rather than a single catastrophic injury. The body camera recording was retained as evidence and was never publicly released. Aside from a brief mention in a regional wildlife publication, the incident received little attention outside professional herpetology circles. The expedition ended where Jeffries had spent his career trying to educate others about constrictors. In the end, the danger he believed experience alone could overcome proved stronger than decades of knowledge. Next, we move from a massive python in the jungle to a fisherman on open water who thinks the same way right before something hidden in his net changes everything. It was August 7th, 2015. On the Sulu Sea off Tawi-Tawi Province, Philippines, a fisherman dismissed what looked like a minor snakebite that would prove fatal only hours later. Romy Aguilon, 41, had fished the waters off Tawi-Tawi since childhood, supporting his wife and 3 children with a small motorized banca. Known among fellow fishermen for working quickly, he routinely removed sea snakes from his nets barehanded, believing years without an accident had proven experience more valuable than protective gloves. He often reminded his younger cousin Noel, 22, who worked alongside him, that speed was the safest way to handle them. A small wooden banca, a family depending on the next catch. That kind of pressure before the day even starts. While retrieving one of their nets, Romy, Noel, and another crew member named Ferdo found 2 sea snakes tangled among the catch. Romy removed the first with ease, but the second was tightly wrapped through several sections of the mesh. Although Noel offered to grab the rubber gloves stored nearby, Romy declined and continued working the snake free with both hands. As his grip briefly slipped, the snake twisted around his forearm and bit the back of his left hand before releasing. The wound was little more than a tiny puncture and barely painful, so Romy dismissed it and continued working. Only after the crew had finished sorting the catch and started back toward shore did he quietly admit that his legs felt unusually heavy before telling Noel they no longer seemed to respond properly. Sea snake bites can be deceptive. At first, they often don't hurt much, but the venom is already at work. It starts interfering with the connection between the nerves and muscles while also damaging muscle tissue. As the venom spread through Romy's body, his legs were the first to weaken. When he tried to stand, his knees just gave out beneath him. Then, his hands started losing strength, making it hard to hold on to the side of the boat. Before long, his eyelids began to droop, and his words came out more and more slurred. Struggling to keep his head up, he finally told Noel that the snake had bitten him, and then his chin slowly dropped against his chest. Noel caught him before he could collapse completely, while Ferdo pushed the boat's engine as hard as it would go toward shore. By the time they reached the dock, Romy was barely responsive and taking only shallow, uneven breaths. I want to be clear, the people on that dock did everything right once he was on shore. Staff at a nearby health station quickly gave him oxygen, supported his airway, and arranged emergency transport to the nearest district hospital. Despite the medical team's efforts, the hospital had neither sea, snake, antivenom, nor the intensive respiratory support needed to sustain him until additional treatment could arrive. Romy's breathing continued to weaken as the paralysis reached the muscles responsible for respiration. He died later that day from respiratory failure caused by severe sea snake inflammation. The post-mortem examination concluded that the tiny puncture wound on his left hand had allowed a highly potent venom to trigger progressive neuromuscular paralysis. There were no major external injuries, only evidence of venom-induced muscle damage consistent with severe sea snake envenomation. The snake involved had been identified by the crew as a beaked sea snake. The incident received little public attention, but among local fishermen, it reinforced the lesson many had ignored for years. The smallest bite can carry the greatest danger when it comes from one of the ocean's most venomous snakes. Noel continued fishing after the loss, but from that day forward, he never handled another sea snake without first using the puncture-resistant gloves and snake handling tools Romy had chosen not to use. I just assumed it was another quick job, something he had done hundreds of times before. But next, we head inland to South Africa, where something falls out of a tree during a normal workday and lands in the worst possible place. It was February 11th, 2021. On a private property outside Tzaneen in Limpopo province, South Africa, a snake hidden high in a storm-damaged tree turned an ordinary workday into a fatal medical emergency. Obazi Dlamini, 33, had spent several years working for a small local tree service, clearing storm-damaged trees and maintaining private properties throughout the region. Quiet and dependable, he had relocated from KwaZulu-Natal to support his mother back home and had extensive experience with chainsaws, though he had never received formal training in identifying dangerous wildlife hidden in tree canopies. He moved provinces to take care of his mother. Just sit with that for a second before the rest of the story. That morning, Obasi was working with company owner Gert Visser, 48, and a co-worker named Sifo Koza, 27, clearing storm-damaged branches along a property fence line. One cracked fig tree limb was still hanging overhead, and hidden among the leaves was an adult boomslang. Its green and black coloring blended in so well with the branches that none of them noticed it. As Gert cut through the weakened limb with a chainsaw and Sifo stepped back, Obasi stayed nearby, ready to drag the branch away once it hit the ground. He had no idea the snake was right above him. The branch twisted as it fell and slammed into the ground, throwing the boomslang straight onto Obasi's shoulder. Startled, he instinctively grabbed whatever had landed on him before realizing it was a snake. As he caught hold of its body, the frightened boomslang bit the webbing between his left thumb and index finger. Because boomslangs are rear-fanged, it held on for several seconds before Obasi finally managed to fling it into the surrounding brush, where it disappeared almost immediately. Several seconds of contact with rear fangs. Most people don't realize that's how rear-fanged envenenation works. It's not a quick strike. The snake has to hold on. The wound looked insignificant. 2 tiny puncture marks remained on his hand with only mild discomfort. None of the crew could identify the snake, and believing it was probably harmless, they cleaned the bite, stopped briefly at a nearby pharmacy for pain medication and antiseptic supplies, then returned to work after deciding the bite appeared too minor to justify a hospital visit. For several hours, Obasi showed almost no symptoms beyond a mild headache and an unusual sensation around his gums. Unlike many venomous snakes, a boomslang's venom works slowly, attacking the body's ability to clot blood rather than causing immediate pain. The delayed onset convinced everyone that the bite had not been serious. As the afternoon continued, small cuts on Obasi's hands from handling branches refused to stop bleeding. His headache steadily worsened, and he began feeling increasingly weak and lightheaded. Soon afterward, blood appeared when he spat onto the ground. Moments later, he vomited, and the vomit contained blood. Bleeding also began from both nostrils, while the tiny bite wound continued to seep through layers of cloth wrapped around his hand. Realizing something was seriously wrong, his co-workers called emergency services. Obasi was transported to a regional hospital, where doctors recognized the signs of severe hemotoxic snake envenomation. However, the facility did not stock boomslang antivenom, and although antivenom was requested from another city, it could not arrive before irreversible hemorrhagic complications had developed. He developed catastrophic intracranial bleeding as the coagulopathy worsened and died the following morning without regaining consciousness. Antivenom was coming, but not in time. And that gap between knowing and help arriving is what I can't forget. The post-mortem examination concluded that Obasi died from venom-induced consumptive coagulopathy resulting from boomslang envenomation. Despite the fatal outcome, the bite itself consisted of only 2 tiny puncture marks between his thumb and index finger, illustrating how little external damage such envenomation can produce. The case was later cited by wildlife specialists as an example of the dangers of delayed symptoms and species misidentification in occupational settings. Now we go to a crowded park in Bangkok, where a snake is already trying to escape until the crowd pushes the situation too far. It was April 14th, 2022. In Lumphaní Park, Bangkok, Thailand, a king cobra repeatedly tried to escape a growing crowd before a single bite led to a death days later. Shanat Bothong was 38 years old and worked as a construction subcontractor on residential building projects around Bangkok. After his doctor recently suggested he get a little more exercise, he started spending his weekends walking through Lumpini Park with two friends, Juan, 35, and Krit, 40. None of them had any experience around wild animals, and Khanat wasn't the kind of person who went looking for trouble. If anything, he usually tried to avoid it. While walking near one of the park's canals, the group noticed a crowd gathering around a large king cobra, partially concealed beneath dense shrubs. The snake, estimated at around 10 feet long, had spread its hood and repeatedly attempted to retreat toward the water. But each escape route was blocked, as curious bystanders moved closer to record videos with their phones. A park security officer arrived and immediately contacted wildlife authorities, but had no equipment to safely control the situation. As more people surrounded the snake, someone suggested pushing it toward the canal. Juan immediately advised against getting involved, but several people turned their attention toward Shanat. Feeling pressured by the crowd and seeing others recording, he picked up a thin bamboo walking stick that had been left beside a nearby bench.
No one forced him, but a crowd with phones out creates pressure that can change how you act fast.
Keeping several feet away, Shanat cautiously extended the stick toward the snake. The cobra struck the bamboo with remarkable speed before immediately recoiling into a defensive posture. The crowd reacted with laughter and excited shouting. Embarrassed but encouraged by the reaction, Shanat stepped slightly closer and reached toward the snake again, this time attempting to move it from behind. The cobra launched forward. With no barrier between them, the snake lunged and bit deeply into Shanat's left calf through his track pants before quickly disappearing back into the shrubs. The crowd instantly scattered. Several people screamed, while others continued filming. Shanat stumbled backward onto the path, repeatedly saying he had been bitten. Aside from 2 puncture wounds, there appeared to be little immediate injury, and he seemed more confused than frightened. At first, the bite wasn't nearly as painful as Shanat expected, but that didn't mean the venom wasn't working. King cobra venom mainly attacks the nervous system, interfering with the signals between the nerves and muscles. Within minutes, the pain in his calf began to build, and his leg started feeling strangely weak. He had trouble controlling it and struggled to keep his balance. His speech became slower and more slurred, and before long, he admitted he could barely move his foot. Then his eyelids began to droop as the weakness slowly spread through the rest of his body.
Eyelids dropping. That's when you realize it's no longer just a bite. It's systematic.
Emergency responders found Shanat struggling to breathe as the venom paralyzed his respiratory muscles. He was transported to a nearby hospital where doctors administered king cobra antivenom and placed him on mechanical ventilation. Although the antivenom neutralized circulating venom, the paralysis that had already developed required prolonged mechanical ventilation. During his stay in intensive care, he developed aspiration pneumonia that progressed to sepsis despite aggressive treatment. Shanat died a week after the bite. The post-mortem examination concluded that Chanat's death resulted from sepsis secondary to aspiration pneumonia, a complication of respiratory paralysis caused by king cobra envenomation. The bite itself produced a single bite wound containing 2 fang punctures with localized tissue damage. Warning signs were later added throughout the park, reminding visitors not to approach wildlife. But for many who witnessed the incident, the lasting memory was that the cobra had repeatedly tried to escape before anyone attempted to force it to move.
A peaceful walk turned uneasy as I saw a crowd gather around something people should have stayed away from.
Inside an abandoned hospital, a live stream takes a sudden turn when a piece of old furniture shifts and something is hiding underneath. It was October 4th, 2020. Inside an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Mandalay, Myanmar, a live stream exploring an abandoned building became a race against one of Asia's most dangerous snakes. Saintway 24, operated a small urban exploration YouTube channel where he documented abandoned factories, clinics, and government buildings around Myanmar. The channel earned little money, but he enjoyed filming forgotten places and funded his equipment through part-time work at a local print shop. Curious and self-taught, he usually explored alone because he believed it made his videos feel more authentic. Although viewers had previously warned him about snakes inside abandoned buildings, he believed they would avoid people if left alone.
A print shop just funding a YouTube channel about abandoned buildings. That's honestly kind of admirable.
That morning, Sign entered a long-abandoned district hospital, carrying only his camera and a small backpack while live streaming to a few dozen viewers. Moving through collapsed hallways and rooms filled with broken furniture, damp records, and scattered debris, he eventually reached an old storage room. A large metal filing cabinet leaned against the wall at an angle, and Sign decided to lift it to see what had been left underneath. Hidden beneath the cabinet was an adult Russell's Viper, using the sheltered space as a resting site. Its brown patterned body blended almost perfectly with the rotting paper and debris surrounding it. As the cabinet shifted, the snake reacted instantly. Before Sign even realized what had happened, the Viper struck the base of his right thumb. He dropped the cabinet with a loud crash and yanked his hand back. 2 puncture marks were already starting to swell. Looking into the camera, he quietly said that something had bitten him. Then he spotted the snake, and you could almost see the realization hit him. He immediately understood just how serious the situation might be. Within the next several minutes, severe pain intensified as swelling began spreading across Sane's hand and wrist. With viewers urging him to seek help through the live stream chat, he hurried back through the abandoned building, tripped over broken debris, and instinctively caught himself with the bitten hand, sending another wave of pain through the already swollen limb.
He caught himself with the bitten hand. Your body just does that. No override for it.
After climbing back out through the broken window, Sign made it only a short distance before collapsing outside. He was pale, drenched in sweat, and far too dizzy to keep walking. By then, the swelling had spread into his forearm. Looking into the camera one last time, he begged someone watching to call emergency services. A few moments later, his phone battery died, and the live stream suddenly cut off. Emergency responders eventually found Sign outside the building, semi-conscious, suffering from severe swelling, persistent bleeding from the bite site, and signs of developing systemic bleeding. He was transported to a regional hospital and treated with Russell's Viper antivenom. But the delay had already allowed the venom to trigger venom-induced consumptive coagulopathy and acute kidney injury. Despite intensive care, his condition continued to deteriorate as multi-organ failure developed. He died several days after the bite. The post-mortem examination confirmed that severe Russell's Viper envenomation had caused venom-induced consumptive coagulopathy, extensive internal hemorrhage, acute kidney injury, and widespread soft tissue damage around the bite site, despite treatment. The antivenom existed.
The doctors were there, and it still wasn't enough to undo what those hours had already done.
Although several viewers saved the live stream before it ended, most respected his family's request not to share it. His channel remained online, its final upload ending inside the abandoned hospital. Out in a quiet field in Tennessee, a geocaching search leads someone to reach deep into a narrow gap thinking it's just metal buried in the ground. It was September 9th. 2014. Along a rural dead-end road in Jefferson County, Tennessee, a routine geocaching trip ended after a hidden timber rattlesnake struck from beneath an old railroad tie. Corbin Vale, 44, worked as an accountant for a small local firm and had become an avid geocacher following his divorce several years earlier. Patient and methodical by nature, he had logged hundreds of successful finds and enjoyed searching for difficult caches hidden in unusual locations. Although he knew venomous snakes lived throughout eastern Tennessee, he had little real experience encountering them and had never received any formal outdoor survival training.
Hundreds of successful finds. He wasn't a casual weekend hobbyist. He had put real time into this,
That afternoon, Corbin was working his way through a regional geocaching challenge that took participants to abandoned homesteads and quiet back roads. One of the caches was hidden beneath a row of old railroad ties along the edge of an overgrown field. After finding the right one, he noticed the opening was partly covered by tall grass and an old rusted sheet of metal. The cache hint even suggested reaching deeper into the narrow gap than most people would expect. Without retrieving the flashlight in his pocket, Corbin knelt beside the timber and reached his right hand deep into the shadowed space. Hidden at the back of the gap, an adult timber rattlesnake had been resting beneath the warm railroad tie since the previous night. Its grayish-brown body and dark crossbands blended almost perfectly with the surrounding leaves, bark, and soil. The moment Corbin's fingers brushed against its body, the snake struck. Its fangs pierced the back of his right hand near the knuckles before it immediately recoiled. Corbin jerked his hand free, scraping his knuckles against the underside of the timber as he pulled away. 2 puncture wounds quickly began bleeding, and within minutes, an intense burning pain spread from his hand toward his wrist. Like most rattlesnake bites, timber rattlesnake venom can cause severe pain and rapidly increasing swelling while also affecting the blood and cardiovascular system, making prompt medical treatment critical. Realizing he needed help, Corbin called emergency services. The phone signal was weak, but he managed to give the dispatcher the name of the nearest road before starting the long walk back across the field to his vehicle. Wanting to get there as fast as he could, he picked up the pace without realizing that the extra movement was helping spread the venom as the swelling crept across his hand and into his wrist.
That scrape against the timber on the way out, that small, chaotic extra injury on top of everything else happening in the same second.
By the time he reached his car, his hand was badly swollen, and the pain had spread well past his wrist. Still on the phone with the dispatcher, he became increasingly lightheaded and weak as his blood pressure began to fall. His speech grew slower, his vision blurred, and before long, he became too weak to continue talking. Moments later, the phone slipped from his hand. Emergency responders found Corbin barely responsive beside his vehicle and transported him to a nearby hospital. Doctors administered rattlesnake antivenom and treated him for severe envenomation, but the venom had already triggered profound shock, extensive tissue injury, and venom-induced coagulopathy. Despite intensive care, his condition continued to deteriorate, and he died the following day. The post-mortem examination concluded that Corbin died from complications of severe timber rattlesnake envenomation, including venom-induced shock, coagulopathy, and extensive soft tissue injury. The bite itself consisted of only 2 puncture wounds on the back of his right hand.
He knew venomous snakes lived there. He just didn't know how his body would react if one bit him.
The geocache was later removed, while Corbin's online profile remained unchanged, preserving the final cache he had successfully logged earlier that day. And now for the last case. A metal detector signal leads a man to pull away rocks in an old foundation, not realizing something alive is already there beneath his hands. It was March 22, 2021. At an abandoned homestead outside Wickenburg, Arizona, a routine morning of metal detecting ended after a hidden rattlesnake struck from beneath a collapsed stone foundation. Daxrell was 61 years old and had spent most of his life working as a diesel mechanic before retiring. After losing his wife a few years earlier, he took up metal detecting to stay busy. He loved researching forgotten homesteads and sharing whatever he found on a small personal blog. Most of the time, he explored alone, carrying a voice recorder so he could talk through his discoveries as he went. He knew rattlesnakes were common in Arizona, but he'd never actually been bitten before and had no formal wilderness survival training. He also took medication for high blood pressure, never thinking it could make a dangerous situation even worse. After studying old survey maps, Dax headed to a long-abandoned homestead that he believed other detectorists had overlooked. He spent more than an hour digging up small relics before his detector suddenly gave a strong signal beside the collapsed foundation of an old outbuilding. Curious, he started clearing away loose stones and dirt, then finally reached in by hand to uncover what he was sure was a large piece of buried metal. Hidden within a narrow gap beneath the foundation stones, a Mojave Mojave rattlesnake had been sheltering inside the rubble. Its coloration blended almost perfectly with the surrounding rocks and dirt, leaving Dax no chance to see it before his fingers entered its base. The rattlesnake struck immediately. Its fangs pierced Dax's right index and middle fingers before he jerked his hand away. Only after pulling back did he hear the unmistakable rattle as the snake disappeared deeper into the collapsed foundation. Looking at the two puncture wounds, he realized he had been bitten just as swelling began spreading across his hand. Mojave rattlesnake venom is unusually dangerous because it contains powerful neurotoxins while also causing severe systemic effects that can lead to hypotension and cardiovascular collapse. Within minutes, Dax developed severe pain, rapidly increasing swelling, blurred vision, and growing muscle weakness. Realizing he could no longer drive safely, he stopped his truck near the access road and called his son, Brent, whose first action after the call ended was contacting emergency services.
He didn't call emergency services first. He just called his son. That's just what you do when you're alone and things go wrong.
As the venom spread through his body, Dax's speech became noticeably slurred, and the swelling in his right arm pushed past his elbow. He started struggling to breathe and, between short voice recordings, mentioned that his chest felt unusually tight. His pre-existing high blood pressure, along with the medication he took to manage it, may have made it harder for his body to cope with the venom's effects, although the snake bite itself was still the primary reason his condition kept getting worse.
He'd taken the medication for years without issue, until the day suddenly mattered.
Emergency responders found Dax barely responsive beside his truck and airlifted him to a regional trauma center where doctors administered rattlesnake antivenom. Despite treatment, the combination of severe neurotoxic envenomation and cardiovascular instability led to cardiac arrest, and he died later that day. The post-mortem examination concluded that Dax died from complications of severe Mojave rattlesnake envenomation, resulting in cardiorespiratory collapse. His history of hypertension and prescribed antihypertensive medication were considered possible contributing clinical factors. Brent later recovered his father's equipment but never shared the final voice recording, and the blog was quietly taken offline. Investigators eventually determined that the detector's strong signal had come only from an old galvanized pail lid buried beneath the same stones where the rattlesnake had been hiding.
I've seen a lot of cases, but a pail lid hits different.
Not because it matters, but because it feels too small for how it ended.